There's a stone in front of a tomb, and a smell in the air that everyone standing there is trying not to name out loud. 4 days. That's how long Lazarus has been dead. Long enough that in that climate, in that culture, everyone standing here knows exactly what they'd find if that stone rolled away. Martha will say it out loud in a moment. There will be an odor. The body has already begun to change. Mary is on the ground, not standing with quiet composure, not managing her grief with dignity for the crowd around her. She is on the ground at Jesus' feet, saying the same 6 words her sister said just minutes earlier. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And here's what should stop you before you go any further into this scene. Jesus already knows what he's about to do. He told his disciples days earlier that this sickness would not end in death, that God's glory would be revealed through it. He knows, standing at this exact tomb, that within minutes he's going to call Lazarus' name, and a dead man is going to walk back out into the sunlight. He is not confused about the outcome. He is not caught off guard by death the way everyone else in this crowd is, and he weeps anyway. Here's the detail most people read straight past. Jesus is about to walk toward the worst physical and spiritual suffering any human being has ever endured. Betrayal, torture, abandonment, a death that will tear open the fabric of everything. And yet, every single time Scripture explicitly says he wept, it is never once for himself. Not here, not later, never for his own coming pain. There's exactly one place that pattern comes closest to breaking, and it happens hours before the cross, in a garden with his own sweat falling to the ground like drops of blood. You'll get there with him. But first, you need to see what actually broke him open at this tomb, because it isn't what you think. This is not a story about weakness. This is not a story about a man losing composure in front of a crowd. This is not a story about grief for grief's own sake. This is a story about exactly who and what was ever able to bring God himself to tears. And by the end, you'll see it's the same thing that moves him toward you. Let's back up to the beginning of this scene, because the details matter more than you'd think. When Jesus finally arrives in Bethany, Martha meets him on the road outside the village. She's the practical sister, the one who manages a household, and even in her grief, she reasons with him. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. It's grief wrapped around faith. She's not accusing him, she's reaching for him. Jesus tells her plainly, her brother will rise again. Martha assumes he means the final resurrection, at the last day, the doctrine every faithful Jew of her time believed in. And Jesus corrects her gently with one of the most staggering claims he ever makes. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. Then Martha goes back and gets her sister. Mary comes out to him with the same words her sister used, same accusation, same grief. But she doesn't stay standing while she says them. She falls at his feet, and she's not alone. A crowd of mourners has followed her out from the village, weeping loudly the way mourners in that culture were expected to weep. Professional, audible, communal grief. And this is where John, writing this account, reaches for 2 Greek words with real precision. The first describes what happens inside Jesus as he watches Mary collapse in front of him, surrounded by weeping mourners, enebrimasato. It's usually softened in English translations to something like deeply moved, but that word, in nearly every other place it's used in Greek literature, describes something closer to a snort of anger or indignation, the kind of visceral physical reaction you'd have if you were confronting something you found genuinely offensive. Jesus isn't just sad standing at that tomb. Something in him is disturbed, almost angry, not at Mary, not at the mourners, but at death itself, at what it's done to this family, at the wrongness of a world where someone he loves ends up wrapped in grave clothes inside a stone room. Then, after that internal reaction, comes the shortest verse in the entire Bible. 2 words in English, 1 word in the original Greek. Eidokrisin. Jesus wept. Notice something easy to miss here. This is a quieter, more restrained word than the loud, visible weeping used just a few verses earlier to describe Mary and the crowd around her. Their grief is loud and communal. His is quiet, but real. Tears, not performance, not for the crowd's benefit. An actual physical response breaking through in front of everyone watching. The mourners standing nearby notice it too. See how he loved him, they say. And here's what makes this moment almost impossible to fully sit with. Jesus already knows he's about to raise Lazarus back to life. In a few minutes, this exact grief is going to be undone. The tomb is going to open. The dead man is going to walk out still wrapped in the linen they buried him in. So why weep at all? Because the tears were never about the outcome. They were about entering the pain in front of him, fully, even while already holding the solution in his hands. He doesn't skip past Mary's grief to get to the miracle. He kneels down inside her grief first, the same way he'd kneel down inside yours. Then he calls out in a loud voice to a tomb that has held a body for 4 days. Lazarus, come out. And a dead man walks into the sunlight, still bound in grave clothes, and Jesus tells the stunned crowd standing there to unwrap him. The first time Scripture says Jesus wept, he wasn't standing in front of a tragedy he couldn't fix. He was standing in front of one he was seconds away from undoing completely. And he wept anyway because the grief in front of him was real, and it mattered to him, regardless of what was about to happen next. Here's what makes that first scene so easy for you to underestimate. Jesus wept at a tomb he was about to empty, a tragedy he was seconds away from completely undoing. If tears were only about outcomes, that moment shouldn't have happened at all. If you're starting to see what's actually going on here, go ahead and subscribe, because the next time Scripture says Jesus wept, nothing gets fixed. No stone rolls away, no dead man walks out. This time, the grief just stays. It's days before the cross, and Jesus is riding down the slope of the Mount of Olives with the entire city of Jerusalem spread out below him. Golden stone, the temple catching the afternoon light, a city he has walked toward his whole life. The crowd around him is celebrating. Palm branches, shouts of praise. This is the moment people remember as his triumphal entry. And in the middle of it, at the peak of the celebration, Jesus looks out over the city and he weeps. Luke uses a different word this time, eklion, the same loud, audible, visible weeping used earlier of the mourners at Lazarus' tomb. Not the quiet, restrained tear from before. This is grief you could hear from the road, grief the people walking beside him would have noticed immediately in the middle of what should have been the happiest moment of his final week. Then he speaks, not to comfort anyone around him, but directly to the city itself, like it's a person standing in front of him. Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace. But now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you. And they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation. Here's what most people miss about this moment. Jerusalem hasn't done anything to him yet, not directly, not in this exact moment. The betrayal, the trial, the crucifixion, all of that is still days away. He's not weeping over an injury he's already suffered. He's weeping over what this city is about to do to itself and to him before any of it happens. In Matthew's Gospel, on another occasion, that same grief comes out even more plainly. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing." Picture that image for a second, the way you'd picture it if it were said over your own city. not a king surveying rebellious territory with contempt. A parent, arms open, watching children run toward danger they refuse to be gathered away from. Now here's the detail that should stop you cold. Roughly 40 years after this moment, in the year 70, Roman legions under the future Emperor Titus surrounded Jerusalem exactly as Jesus described: a siege, a barricade, a city torn down stone by stone. The Jewish historian Josephus, who witnessed the aftermath firsthand, recorded the devastation in detail. The temple burned, the walls dismantled, the city left in ruins, almost precisely matching the words Jesus spoke while weeping on that hillside. He wasn't guessing, and he wasn't distant from what he saw coming. He rode toward a celebrating crowd, looked past the palm branches at a city he loved, and wept over a future most of the people cheering around him couldn't yet see. Notice how far the stakes have climbed. At Lazarus' tomb, Jesus wept over one grieving family in a scene he was about to personally reverse. Here, he's weeping over an entire city, millions of people across generations, for a tragedy he will not undo. He doesn't stop the siege from happening 40 years later. He doesn't rewrite the outcome. He simply grieves it, in advance, in real time, in front of a crowd, too busy celebrating to notice what he's actually looking at. It's the night before the cross, and Jesus walks into a garden called Gethsemane with 3 men he trusts more than anyone else on earth, Peter, James, and John, and tells them something none of them are ready to hear. "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death," he says. "Remain here and watch with me." Then he goes a little further into the darkness, alone, and falls to the ground. This is the moment where the pattern you've been tracing with him comes closer to breaking than at any other point in his life. Because here, finally, the suffering isn't someone else's, it's his. Within hours he will be arrested, beaten, mocked, nailed to a cross, and left to die in agony and public humiliation. If there was ever a moment where his tears could reasonably be about himself, this is it. Luke, a physician by training, records a detail no other gospel writer includes, and being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. That detail isn't poetic exaggeration. Extreme psychological distress can, in rare documented cases, cause capillaries to rupture under the skin, mixing blood with sweat, a real, if uncommon, medical condition called hematohydrosis. Luke isn't describing a metaphor. He's describing a body under such extreme anguish that it's breaking down at the cellular level, hours before any physical torture even begins. And the book of Hebrews adds one more layer most people never connect to this scene. In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death. Loud cries, tears. Not the quiet restraint of the tomb, not the audible grief over the city. This is something closer to anguish, a man begging in the dark with everything he has. So here's the question worth sitting with, the one you've probably been waiting for since the opening. After a tomb where he wept for someone else's loss, and a city where he wept over someone else's coming destruction, does this finally break the pattern? Is this at last Jesus weeping for himself? Look closely at what he actually prays. "Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." The content of that prayer is not self-pity. It's not bargaining to escape suffering for its own sake. The cup Jesus refers to throughout Scripture is a symbol of divine judgment, the wrath and consequence of sin poured out. What he's asking to avoid, if there's any other way, is not physical pain alone. It's the specific horror of bearing in himself the full weight of what every other person's sin deserved, yours included. And even in the middle of asking, he submits the outcome to the Father's will. Hebrews tells us he was heard, not because he was spared the cross, but because of his reverence. His prayer wasn't rejected. It was answered in submission, not exemption. Even here, at the most anguished moment of his life, his tears are still bound up with what he's about to carry on behalf of others. The cup he's drinking, so you would never have to drink it alone. Meanwhile, a few feet away, Peter, James, and John, the three men he specifically asked to stay awake with him, are asleep. He comes back 3 times to find them unconscious and asks them, almost gently, if they couldn't watch with him even 1 hour. This is not a story about 3 tired men falling asleep at a bad moment. This is not a story about disciples who simply failed a small test. This is a story about a man who faced the worst night of his life with almost no one truly awake beside him, and still, even then, kept his eyes on you. 3 scenes, 3 moments of tears, a tomb, a city, a garden, and in every single one, even the one soaked in his own sweat and blood, even the one where the suffering finally belongs to him, his tears never once turn inward. They stay fixed on what he's carrying for someone else. If you've ever cried harder over a friend's pain than your own worst day, you already know something true about where real love directs its tears. It doesn't point inward, it points toward the person it loves. And in the garden that night, even facing the worst thing any human being has ever faced, that's exactly where his tears stayed pointed, outward, toward you, all the way to the cross. So here's what these 3 scenes leave you with. Takeaway 1. Scripture only records Jesus weeping in 3 settings: a tomb, a city, and a garden. And in every single one, without exception, his tears point outward. Never once at his own pain, even when his own pain was the worst suffering any human being has ever endured. Takeaway 2. This tells you something true about who God actually is. Not distant from suffering, not detached, managing the universe from somewhere safely above human pain. He wept at a tomb he was about to empty. He wept over a city he still loved, even as it rejected him. He wept in a garden while carrying the weight of everyone else's sin, and still, even there, his prayer was for others before it was for himself. Takeaway 3, and this is the one worth carrying with you. The same tears that fell at Lazarus's tomb, over Jerusalem's rooftops, and onto the ground in Gethsemane are the same posture he holds toward your grief right now. He doesn't observe your pain from a distance. He enters it, the way he knelt down inside Mary's grief, before he ever spoke a word of resurrection over it. So here's my question for you. Out of these 3 moments, the tomb, the city, or the garden, which one hits you the hardest? Tell me below. Because the God who wept for someone else 3 separate times in 3 separate ways has never once stopped being moved by what moves you.